This is Sunday School Class with Ricky, and I am Ricky Williams. Welcome everyone. Welcome to our final lesson in our series in the book of Esther. Over the past several weeks, we have followed one of the most remarkable stories in the Bible. We have watched a Jewish orphan girl become queen of Persia. We've seen a faithful man ignored and forgotten, a proud official rise to power, a decree ordering the destruction of God's people, and then, almost unbelievably, a complete reversal of fortunes. Today's lesson covers both chapters 9 and 10 from the book of Esther. I have entitled today's lesson, "The Reversal is Complete," because these final two chapters are where everything comes together. Today, we will see the complete victory of God's people, the establishment of the Feast of Purim, and the final promotion of Mordecai. Before we begin this final lesson in the series, I want to request that you provide some feedback to us by leaving a comment below. Also, as usual, please like and share the video, and subscribe to our channel. Thank you. Then, as we get back to our lesson, before we finish, I want to spend a few minutes addressing one of the most difficult questions in the book: the large number of people who are killed in chapter 9, in what scholars often call the Canaanite problem. So, as we conclude this great story today, let's study together. The story now jumps forward almost 1 year. Remember, Haman had cast the pur, or lot, in chapter 3 to determine the day the Jews would be destroyed. That day has now finally arrived. The calendar now reads the 13th day of the 12th month, Adar. For almost a year, everyone throughout the empire has known this day was coming. Imagine living for an entire year knowing someone had legally been given permission to kill you. Yet, verse 1 tells us something wonderful. It was turned to the contrary. Those 6 words summarize the entire book of Esther. The enemies expected victory. Instead, they were defeated. The hunted became the defenders. The fearful became courageous. The powerless became protected. That is the great reversal. The Jews gathered together, not to attack innocent people, but to defend themselves against those who still intend to carry out Haman's decree. Notice something important. The text repeatedly says they acted against those who sought their harm or their enemies. This is not portrayed as some random violence, but as a legal self-defense under the king's second decree. Another remarkable change has occurred. Government officials throughout the empire now support the Jews. Why? Because they fear Mordecai. Only a year ago, Mordecai was an unknown civil servant, sitting quietly at the palace gate. Now, his reputation had spread throughout the empire. What a difference 1 year can make. Sometimes God doesn't simply improve our circumstances, sometimes He completely transforms them. The Bible records some very large numbers. 500 men are killed in Susha on the first day. The 10 sons of Haman are also killed. Their names are given, but we will not be attempting to pronounce them in this class. You can read them yourselves if you so desire. Notice something repeated throughout these times though. The text continually says the Jews did not take the spoil. Why is that detail so important? Because this was never about becoming wealthy. This was not a military campaign for profit. This was not looting. It was self-defense. The writer wants us to understand that the Jews were protecting their lives, not enriching themselves. The next day, another 300 attackers are killed in Shushan. Throughout the empire, the number reaches 75,000. Whenever we read numbers like these, we naturally ask whether they are literal, symbolic, or perhaps rounded estimates. Scholars have debated that question for centuries. Regardless of the exact figure, the writer's point is unmistakable. The danger facing God's people was enormous, yet God's deliverance was even greater. After the fighting comes something very different. Celebration. The Jews rest. They feast. They rejoice. They send food to one another. They give gifts to the poor. Mordecai establishes a new annual celebration called Purim. The name comes from the word pur, meaning lot. Haman had thought the casting of lots would determine Israel's destruction. Instead, the very thing that symbolized their destruction became the name of their celebration. Even the title of the feast reminds future generations that God can reverse impossible situations. One interesting question scholars ask is, why does the author spend so much time describing Purim? Well, many believe this was one of the main reasons the book itself was written. Unlike Passover or Pentecost, Purim was not commanded in the law of Moses. It developed later in Israel's history. The book of Esther therefore explains why this celebration deserved a permanent place in Jewish life. Notice what they were instructed to remember. They were to remember how God turned sorrow into joy, mourning into celebration. Now, that sounds a lot like the Christian gospel, doesn't it? Now, chapter 10, the final chapter, contains only 3 verses. After all the excitement, the ending is surprisingly quiet. King Ahasuerus continues ruling his empire. The reference to Isles of the Sea probably refers to the coastal territories and islands under Persian control, emphasizing just how extensive his empire remained. But the real focus is no longer the king. It is on Mordecai. He is now second in the kingdom only to Ahasuerus. The man who once sat unnoticed at the city gate has become the second most powerful man in the empire. Yet, notice how his greatness is described. He sought the welfare of the people. He spoke peace to them. That is biblical leadership. True greatness is not measured by how many people serve you. It is measured by how many people you serve. One final observation. Chapter 10 never mentions Esther again. Her work was finished. She had fulfilled God's purpose, and now the spotlight quietly shifts to Mordecai. Sometimes the greatest servants of God know when their role is complete. Now, before I finish this class today, we should address one question many readers ask. That question is, how should Christians understand the violence we see in Esther chapter 9? After all, 75,000 deaths is an astonishing number. And this is not the only place in the Old Testament where we see such difficult passages. We think of God's command concerning the Amalekites in 1 Samuel 15, or the commands regarding the Canaanite nations in Deuteronomy chapters 7 and 20. This issue is often called the Canaanite problem. Now, there are several ways that scholars understand these passages. Firstly, there is the literal historical view. Some believe the events happen substantially as described. The destruction is understood as divine judgment against societies characterized by centuries of violence, exploitation, and practices such as child sacrifice. This view takes the biblical text largely at face value. Its greatest challenge is the moral question of collective judgment. Secondly, there is what is referred to as hyperbolic war language. Many biblical scholars point out that the ancient Near Eastern military accounts often use exaggerated language. Kings frequently claim that they destroyed everyone or left no survivor, even when later records show those same populations continued to exist. According to this view, phrases such as utterly destroyed often function more as victory language rather than precise military statistics. Thirdly, there's the theory of what is called gradual conquest. Some archaeologists argue that Israel's emergence in Canaan was a much longer and more complex process than a single military campaign. Some suggest the biblical accounts emphasize theological truths rather than providing a modern style military history. And fourthly, there's what is known as the theological reading. Both Jewish and Christian interpreters have often understood these stories symbolically. The Canaanites represent idolatry, evil, and sin. The lesson becomes more one of complete devotion to God rather than a model for warfare. Now, what about today? How do we see these passages today? Now, these Old Testament passages should not be used as justification for modern political or military conflicts. The commands given to ancient Israel belonged to a unique historical and covenant context. They are descriptive of a particular period in Israel's history, not prescriptive for nations or individuals today. As Christians, our calling is to love our enemies, seek justice, pursue peace where possible, and leave ultimate judgment in God's hands. As we complete this series, let me leave you with 4 lasting lessons. Number 1, God is always working. Even when His name is never mentioned, even when He seems silent, God is never absent. 2, God uses ordinary people. An orphan girl, a civil servant. Neither possessed worldly power, yet God used them both to save an entire nation. 3, God's timing is perfect. The sleepless night, the forgotten records, the delayed banquet, the second decree, every detail arrived at exactly the right moment. And finally, 4, God brings great reversals. That is the message of Esther. God turned fear into courage. He turned mourning into celebration. He turned an orphan into a queen. He turned a forgotten servant into the prime minister of Persia. He turned the enemy's gallows into the enemy's downfall. And he turned what looked like certain defeat into an overwhelming victory. So as we bring this series to a close, I hope you remember at least this one phrase: the great reversal. Perhaps today you feel like you are still living in Esther chapter 3. The decree has gone out. Your future looks uncertain. You cannot see a solution. Remember this: God already knows chapter 6 of your life. He already knows chapter 9. He already knows how your story ends. The book of Esther reminds us that God's providence is often invisible, but it is never absent. Our circumstances may change slowly. Sometimes they change suddenly. But in every season, God remains faithful. And ultimately, the greatest reversal of all was not found in Persia. It happened outside Jerusalem. The cross looked like defeat. The empty tomb became the greatest reversal in history. Because Jesus Christ lives, every believer can face the future with hope. So I thank you for joining me throughout this journey through the book of Esther. I pray that, like Esther and Mordecai, we will all trust God's unseen hand, remain faithful in difficult times, and never forget that our God is still in the business of bringing about great reversals. As always, our main goal and desire is for you to come to a relationship with the Lord Jesus Christ. If you haven't done so already, why not do so now? Romans chapter 10 and verse 9 says that if thou shalt confess with thy mouth the Lord Jesus, and shalt believe in thine heart that God has raised him from the dead, thou shalt be saved. I hope to see you again soon when we begin our next study of Bible and Christian history. Until then, God bless you.